Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Foundry Healthcare webinar on patient compliance, entitled How Can Patient Compliance Build Brand Trust? What we're going to cover this afternoon is a little bit of background just on the issue of patient compliance and indeed why the hell we need to worry about it at all as brand marketeers. We're then going to start a little bit to talk about the challenges that it engenders for patients, for healthcare professionals, and for those of us who are tasked with communicating to those audiences. And then for the majority of this afternoon's webinar, I want to really start to think about how we can utilise those challenges and opportunities as brands in order to really take advantage and to engender more sort of trust, engagement, and ultimately sales. So we're going to think about 3 tactics that we can employ around patient compliance that can really make your brand indispensable, not just to patients, but also to families and to healthcare professionals. Why are we talking about this at all? Well, at the Foundry, we have got more years than we care to admit experience in the healthcare arena. And as part of that interest and passion that we have for this topic, we conduct regular panels with healthcare professionals, at which we sit down with a bunch of nurses, doctors, pharmacists, vets, and we talk to them about the hot issues, the things that are absorbing them in their day-to-day existence, what's keeping them up at night, what's going on, what their feelings are, and really from these insights, they form a part of the strategic work that we do for our regular clients, and also we like to formulate some of those findings into these webinars to share with you. So indeed the last panel that we had was on this issue of patient compliance, some great learnings that we got from our nurses, and we'll pepper through some of those observations as we go through the webinar this afternoon. So, compliance, why worry? If people don't take the tablets, do we as the manufacturers of those tablets or of those medical devices, to what extent does it really concern us? Why is it such a big issue? Well, before we start to go into that in depth, let's just try and get a little bit of an understanding of the scale of this as an issue. What is the problem? Well, in actual fact, it's a huge problem. Estimates vary according to the research that you read, but they're all around about the same sort of level that suggests about 50% of people with non-acute disorders just don't take the medications that have been prescribed to them. And it's not just in issues such as, a runny nose or a bout of flu. Often these are, life-threatening or sight-threatening conditions, things that are really serious and significant disorders. So, for example, in glaucoma, a study revealed that 58% of glaucoma patients were non-compliant, and that's despite being told that non-compliance would result in blindness. Now, it actually gets even more amazing when you start to look at beyond those statistics, and 42% of people who had already lost sight in one eye due to glaucoma were still non-compliant. So just amazing when you think about what's really going on. A statistic from another medical arena, non-compliance is the 3rd most common cause of rejection of renal transplant. And renal transplant, a huge issue, hugely invasive procedure, massively life transforming for people who are at that stage of kidney disease. And yet, having gone through and jumped through all of those hoops, gone through the operation, significant numbers of them are still non-compliant. So it's an amazingly huge issue. So what's going on? Who actually benefits when people do comply? Well, really everybody. You start to think about nurses and doctors and HCPs. Of course, that their advice is listened to. They get their patients better quicker. Their surgeries are not clogged up with people who are coming back. In fact, 5% of admissions to NHS hospitals are as a direct result of non-compliance, recent surveys show. So, of course, medical professionals have got a real interest in promoting compliance to regimes, to drug and medicine regimes. Of course, there is a cost benefit to all of this. Recent estimates suggest that around about £5 billion is saved annually, is squandered annually as a direct result of non-compliance. So enormous cost issues around compliance. And finally, patients themselves and their carers benefit. if they comply with the regime, they get better quicker, they start feeling better, all sorts of comorbidities start to be impacted. So, compliance is a big deal for patients as well. What about us as brands? What about us as brand owners? I suppose the more cynical amongst us might say, well, if, they're taking the tablets for longer, surely that means more sales for us. Well, not really. For brand owners, if we've got patients who are compliant, then ultimately that leads to better clinical outcomes. Better clinical outcomes lead to increased confidence in the efficacy of the product, increased confidence directly relevant to increased advocacy. It creates more trust in the brand. More trust in the brand leads to increased usage, leads to ultimately increased sales. It's a more long-term view of the role that brands have to play in terms of long-term engagement with patients. So it's great, it's good for us to do that. So great, we all say, let's help improve compliance. And of course, it isn't as easy as that. For every complex solution, it has often been said, there is a solution that is simple, neat and wrong. And in the case of compliance, the solution is to tell people what they need to do and why. This sounds completely counterintuitive. You take that incidence of glaucoma, telling somebody, look, if you don't do this, you will go blind. Surely anybody with an ounce of sense is going to keep on taking the tablets. And yet, as we've seen, they don't. We can think of two ubiquitous examples that are around us all of the time in which information, being told what to do and why, just doesn't seem to have a great deal of impact. Numerous studies have said, have shown that the warnings on cigarette packets, which have got increasingly in your face as years have gone by, they don't really have a major impact on committed smokers. What actually happens is that committed smokers just close their eyes to them. They don't even notice them. They are sort of so inured in this, in everything that is motivating them to smoke, they don't see the messages. Of course they understand them. You talk to them, yes, they will admit that, that those messages are there, but they're ignoring them. Exactly the same thing happening with the obesity crisis at the moment. You cannot you cannot open a magazine or a newspaper or go online without seeing information about the obesity crisis, about the fact that high-fat, high-sugar foods are causing an epidemic which is having a really, really big impact on people's health and people's life expectancy. And yet, how difficult do we all find it to lose weight? How difficult do we all find it to not go into McDonald's or not have the chips or not have the extra Jaffa cake? Talking about me now. So, we can see why telling people what to do and why isn't necessarily the best line of defence against, non-compliance. And yet, when we spoke to our nurses, what do nurses do? They tell people what they need to do and why. It's just so hardwired into us that this is the solution. And, a couple of examples that came through from the groups. You just have to explain the reason why you're using compression, that it's a long process, it gets worse before it gets better. But they still cut the bandages off. Nurses are hugely frustrated by knowing what the outcomes are, and yet they will consistently go back through to that education perspective. We're no better. What do most brands do? We tell people what they need to do and why. All of our patient information materials, what's going on websites, a lot of the materials that go through with to healthcare professionals is again, it's educational in nature. It's telling people what they need to do and why. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong, because of course there is a place for this, but we're simply suggesting that it isn't the entire story, and that when we're talking about compliance, we really need to augment this with some of the messaging, with some of the tactics. So what else can we do? Well, I think it's important really to understand what's going on. Why don't patients just take the tablets? And this isn't a new phenomenon. That non-compliance has been around for as long as the science of medicine has been around. We're going back 500 years BC. Patients weren't taking the tablets. And you can imagine they were a new thing at that time. It must have been absolutely amazing that suddenly diseases were being, we were starting to treat diseases at this time, and yet patients weren't taking the tablets then. This has been going on for a long, long time. Why? Why don't patients just take the tablets? Well, as you can imagine, an enormous amount of research has been put into this topic over hundreds of years. And one can, oversimplifying it of course, but one can boil it down to three main areas. The first being lack of knowledge or understanding. So actually I genuinely don't get what I'm supposed to be doing, which of course is where our education does have a role. Secondly, there is a very real fear of side effects amongst patients. When you're being told to take some medication and suddenly that is giving you a side effect which is making you nauseous at 3 o'clock in the morning, or it's got some other potential side effects that you're really concerned and worried about, that does have a major impact on your likelihood of completing a course of medication or staying on that medication. And finally, there is the disassociation of the consequences. Again, a biggie really when you start to think about those examples of obesity and smoking in particular, in that my actions today, whether or not I take a tablet today or I'm mistaking it, sort of doesn't have an immediate consequence. The consequences of it are 3 months, 3 years, 3 decades in the future. So it's quite easy to sort of think that what I do today doesn't necessarily matter, doesn't necessarily have that impact. So let's have a look at each of them in turn and start to think about what we can do as brands. So firstly, starting to think about this lack of knowledge and understanding. So yes, this is about delivering information, but I think what we need to start to think about is how do we deliver that brand information in a way that aids compliance behaviour? And it starts with education. But let's think about that education a little bit more deeply. What is it we're saying? What are the key messages that our audiences need to hear that's going to encourage that compliance? What are the channels that we need to direct that information? And crucially, when do we need to talk to them? When do those messages have the most chance of getting through and making an impact? So I think it's worthwhile starting to think about some specifics behind this. Thinking about, for your particular treatment regime, for your particular medical solution, service, product, or whatever it is, what's going on with the condition and with the patients that are suffering from that condition? Why is it that's, what is it that's motivating non-compliance in those instances? And it's really important to understand the specifics behind this. A bunch of ways of doing this. You can talk to patients direct, which is fantastic. You can talk to healthcare professionals or key opinion leaders who have a great understanding of what's really going on. More and more we can go online. We can start to eavesdrop in on patient forums, on social media to understand how people are talking to each other, how sufferers are sort of, what their day-to-day experiences are, so that we can start to understand what's going on. But crucial to understand, what are the motivations, what's happening, what is driving behaviour when it comes to the specific product that we're talking about. So once we have that, it's useful to start to think about the when, the what and the when and the how. And it's useful to start really with thinking about the initial patient journey. Any new condition starts off with a diagnosis phase. Now, diagnosis is characterised a lot of the time, particularly with more chronic serious conditions, with a period of very, very high anxiety. Often patients are in shock. If you've suddenly got the information given to you that you've got diabetes or that you've got a heart condition or your child has eczema, it is a shock. It is a lot to take in. It's a time of high anxiety. It's then followed by a period of transition where that anxiety is reduced somewhat. And this is the time really when education really kicks in. There's a lot of new information. You are hungry for that information. You want to find out everything about the condition. You want to find out what you can do to get back into control. You need to learn all about the new regimes, the new medication that you've got to deal with. Potentially you've got to start to think about, I need to change my behaviour in some way. So information hungry, this is when you're hoovering up anything that you can get hold of that starts to give you that information. But of course that's then followed with, particularly with chronic conditions, a long sustained period of living with that condition. And of course the anxiety drops off, you get used to it, this is where complacency kicks in, and compliance oftentimes falls off a cliff at this stage. And typically this starts to happen within weeks and certainly no more than months after that initial diagnosis. You start to see compliance rates kicking in of roughly about 30% in typical cases. So where are the brand opportunities? What can we do as if we understand this? start to think about the diagnosis phase. When somebody is in shock, they're not in a position to really start to absorb all of that information that you're chucking at them. In fact, that information is better thrown at families and carers rather than patients. Patients need reassurance. They don't necessarily need all of the lecturing, all of the information, all of the detail. Oftentimes it's their support network who are the people that really want to and are able to get under the skin of that information. Transition phase, absolutely. All of the stuff that we are all, as healthcare brand marketeers, we're bloody good at this. We're very, very good at getting over information about the condition, information about treatment, our product usage guides, and so on and so forth. But I think when you start to look through and pull some of these communications apart a little bit, are we really strong enough at actually providing the information and the support that starts to establish the compliance behaviours that we need at that early stage? And I think that's a useful question, and it's a useful thing to start to review, everything that we've got in the cabinet on the website at the moment in terms of our materials. Are we really supporting compliance at that stage that we're giving out all of this fabulous information? And then there's the living with. What's needed here? Well, there's no point just carrying on telling people all about eczema. I know about eczema now. I'm there. You don't need to keep telling me that stuff. What I need now is I need different sort of support to help aid compliance. Now, this is going to differ according to the condition and according to the type of patients that we've got, but typically we might start to think about becoming a hub for support for patients who are living with that condition. It may well be that we sponsor forums, that we get involved in live patient groups, any way really of giving people the support that they need to help themselves. And crucially here is a brand's engagement with the wider care team, so that, at the time when compliance is falling off a cliff, everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, everybody's, helping patients in a way that the care team start to support each other. So let's think about that through the medium of a couple of examples. Salts Healthcare are a company that manufacture colostomy bags, ileostomy bags, urostomy equipment. So people, this is a huge life-changing issue that people have to go through, facing up to sort of suddenly having to have a colostomy or an ileostomy. And the whole support that the website is founded upon is really alongside that patient journey. So a section of everything that you need to know at diagnosis stage. What does this really mean for you? What's going on? What happens when you've just been diagnosed? There's another section of the website which has information which is directly to do with the practicalities of what happens when you go in to have the operation, how you start to recover, what you're having to do with in terms of starting to get used to the new regimes that you're going to be faced with at the time of having the operation and going home immediately. So everything that you need to support you through that transition phase. And then finally, it's living with the stoma. How you actually go on day to day, some of the issues that might sort of happen to you as you're living with the results of this operation. And salts go beyond the website in terms of the support, so there are specific offline materials that are designed to help patients at specific points through the patient journey. So here we've got a series of hospital to home packs whereby that information is given to people together with product samples and so on that helps people get their head around and get their emotions around what is happening to them at that transition phase. Salts also run an enormously successful program of patient support groups whereby patients get together for a cup of tea and a slice of cake, together with stoma care nurses, together with Salts representatives, together with the people who actually even drive the delivery trucks that deliver these products through on a regular basis, whereby they can support and learn from each other and help one another. Enormously successful, and all of this together means that Salts are not simply the manufacturer of a product that of colostomy bags and a product. They're actually become much more of a partner for people who are living with this condition, and equally as importantly, a part of the team in the eyes of stoma care nurses and the specialists of this condition. So it's transformed what this brand really means through a high level of engagement and a high level of understanding of that patient journey in order to support compliance. Thinking about who, How do we get involved with the wider care team? The patient is at the heart of this. We as the brand are only one arm of a number of people and a number of organisations that the patient is getting information, advice and support from. How much stronger is our voice going to be if we also help and support everybody else in that circle, so that we're all talking together, we're all, singing from the same hymn sheet. And again, what we know is that nurses, if they perceive that you're not simply out there to sell your product, you're out there to give the same information that they're giving to support compliance, giving the same information and the same advice that they would be giving their patients, that you're on their side, then that means an awful lot to nurses. It means that they can help build their trust with you as a brand as well, which is, as we all know, is utterly important. How can we do that as brands? Well, certainly at Foundry Healthcare, we involve nurses, we involve patient associations, really at the start of the process. We do not write a word of copy until we've got that involvement, that we understand that what we're going to be saying is absolutely in line with the advice and the opinion of these crucial members of the care team. And nurses themselves, recognise that they're just one prong. We were talking a lot about the involvement of family, and how in one case families can put them under an enormous amount of pressure because they're the ones that you're not getting them out of pain. But equally, they can get family to step in, particularly on compliance, and get them to use emotional blackmail, get the patients to do things that they can't. So this recognition of the wider care team is absolutely crucial. An example again from some work, UNUC is a website which is dedicated to teenage sufferers of ulcerative colitis. Again, compliance, huge issue with something like this, particularly when you're a teenager. Compliance, all of the studies know that compliance amongst teenagers is actually even more difficult than it is amongst adults, because you don't want to be labelled as somebody with a disease, particularly not when you're at that stage of your life which is all about forging identity. So a website that sort of really focuses in on that insight, but also provides lots of information because it's the support network, it's friends and parents who are going to be helping support that individual. So there's advice on the website that's directed exactly at those groups, at those parents, those carers, those peer group, that peer group. So let's move on and think about fear of side effects. And, what is it that we can do as brands that stop people actually switching away from our product because they blame us for the side effects? Side effects are interesting. Again, it sort of goes back to that thing about, what's happening today versus what happens tomorrow. I'm taking a medication, I'm on some sort of treatment regime which is going to help me in the long term. But actually now, at 2 o'clock in the morning, when I'm throwing my guts up or I'm feeling absolutely bloody awful, that's the thing that's most important to me. That's the thing that's occupying all of my attention. So, of course, that has a major impact in terms of side effects. Now, nurses, interestingly, are not terribly sympathetic about side effects because from their perspective, they see the bigger picture. And, some of the quote, in fact, it was almost funny. When you were in the group, they were almost outraged about, I feel like saying to them point blank, if you don't take it, you're going to end up dead. Now, that's fine from the nurse's perspective because they know the absolute importance of compliance, but from a patient point of view, it is very, very different. So what should your brand do? Well, actually, the last thing that you should do is put your head in the sand and ignore side effects. If your product has a propensity to actually have side effects which are going to impact on patients, then your brand materials should be talking about it. You should be educating about these potential side effects at the same time as you're educating about your product. That transition phase, which is all about here's what you're now having to deal with, side effects should be writ large. What you can expect and how to deal with them. Because, of course, it's, as with anything that's frightening, if you don't know about it, then it's even more scary, it's even more frightening. So it's about offering support strategies for dealing with these side effects. It's great, here's what you may expect. Not everybody, some people might get these side effects. Here's some help and advice and support into what you can do about them. We can think as brands about the role of the wider care team, particularly pharmacists here, because pharmacists are often the first point of call if somebody's having a problem with the medication. You know, they are there, they are acceptable. You know, are the materials that our brands are giving to pharmacists dealing with, you know, what are the potential side effects for people on our medication and what can they be saying? And then finally, I think it's crucial to really think about the context and the timing. As we said, you know, oftentimes it's in the middle of the night when these things are hitting. And increasingly, where do we go in the middle of the night when something's happening to us? We go to Google. And, you know, it's interesting, if we Google side effects to you know, is Google going to direct them to your website where you've got some helpful advice for them that reassures them that taking your product is something that they need to keep on doing? Worth thinking about, because, you know, increasingly we know that patients really try, well, all of us, you know, it's ubiquitous, it's important that we're there, it's important that we're easily found with the right advice that starts to help, you know, patients over this hump of side effects and keeps that compliance on board. So thirdly, we talked about disassociation of consequences. And again, you know, this is a complex one, I won't deny, and it's not easy to get over, but there are things that we as brands can do that actually can start to help build engagement with this. What's going on? Well, actually, this really, we could start to think about two main roots of this disassociation of consequences: forgetfulness and denial. Forgetfulness is simply because, you know, the consequences of not taking my medication are at some, you know, moot point in the future, potentially. Today, I've got 1,000,001 other things to do. You know, I've got to get to a meeting, I've got to pick up little Johnny from school, I've got to take the cat to the vet, I've got to get the shopping in, I've got to complete a report from work, you know, on and on and on and on it goes. It's easy to, you know, deal with what's in front of you, forget about what's going on in the future. The other state of mind really is one of denial, which is slightly different in that, you know, it's about this thing of really not wanting to have your identity completely tied up with the identity of somebody who is suffering from a condition, a disease, you know, being badged really with, as somebody who's got something wrong with them in some way. And of course, medication can often seem to be a badge of that. You know, I've got to be the one that's actually got to go and have this insulin injection at this point in time. I've got to take these tablets. It starts to potentially be seen as being a badge of illness. And it's easier sometimes to actually forget about it, to actually live in blissful ignorance, to say, you know what, it might not happen. Happily, the sort of result, or what we can potentially do with both of these things, is sort of the same for both of them, although the tactics become quite different. And, you know, the strategy is make the compliance behaviour easy. Don't worry so much about the consequences. If we're disassociated with the consequences and with the ultimate benefits, we need to bring everything back to changing the behaviour today, influencing that behaviour today. And that really is all about making it easy. So in the case of our forgetful people, how do we make it easy? Well, those of us who are old enough, Zoe and I obviously aren't, but, you know, it used to be in the good old days, then people had days of the week pill reminders. I think that they're still around. But, you know, oftentimes brands would brand these things. We've got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Your pills are in there. That's it. That's fine. It's nice and easy. It's made it easy for you. And, you know, they're still a great thing. Still a lot of them around. Still very, very useful. But, of course, in 2013, we are living in different times. Technologically, we are incredibly sophisticated. And I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody about the number of apps that are available that help with, you know, health and well-being. I think I read somewhere the other day that there's around about 40,000, they estimate, of these things that are out there that can help in one way or another. And again, I'm sure that we've all sort of got experience of there's some bloody good ones of these around, and, you know, oftentimes brands have produced things that are very, very useful in supporting compliance behaviour, you know, reminding people when they need to take medication, helping them monitor their condition so that they're managing their condition in a way that makes it easy for them. So absolutely, you know, apps needs to be sort of, you know, part of our armoury increasingly these days. So that's forgetfulness. What about these people in denial? Because actually, if you keep on reminding them about it, then they're sort of really going to dig their heels in a little bit more. Well, in actual fact, this really starts to be about making it about them, not the condition. Again, making that focus into the compliance behaviour. It's about actually not making it a badge, but making it as invisible as it possibly can be, or making it fun. And again, just a few examples of ways in which we can start to help support some of these things. This was an ad campaign that went through to healthcare professionals about prescribing Zindaclin, utilising its compliance advantages. Big advantage for this product is that it's effective against teenage acne, but it only requires treatment once a day rather than the twice a day of most of its competitors. What does that mean? It's actually easier for teenagers to comply. It means it's easier for them to complete the course. So that whole messaging was sort of wrapped up into the advertising campaign that went through to GPs. Tubifast Garments Patch Wrap, again, teenage sufferers of eczema absolutely don't want anything that badges them as being different from their chums. And again, this was a new way of actually having the patch wrap so that it just looked like another piece of clothing. And that's the way that this piece was talking to nurses to say, you know, here's how you start to talk to kids about this. Here's how parents can start to talk to kids about this. It's completely invisible because it just looks like another long sleeve t-shirt. And so it's making the condition invisible for these kids is much more important than, you know, thinking about the consequences of their eczema. And finally on here, a game called Remission, which was developed to help children who are suffering with cancer. It's a great game, shoot 'em up type of game, but it's there really trying to educate children about the disease, but also about the way in which their medication helps them fight off. So you've got all sorts of armoury in terms of chemo, in terms of their immune system, their own red blood cells and so on. Everything, you know, connected through into a game that they can start to feel as though they've got some ownership of and some control over what's happening to them, which really helps in terms of the way that they feel and ultimately in terms of the compliance with treatment. So hopefully, you know, we've given you a few, you know, a little bit of food for thought really with this, because I think from, you know, there are things that we can do as brands that help with compliance, and there are advantages to brands from helping with compliance. As we've said, it's about these better clinical outcomes, and that ultimately is going to lead to increased advocacy, trust, usage, and ultimately an impact on the bottom line, which is, you know, what, after all, why we're all here at the end of the day. So hopefully that's given you a few sort of, a little bit of food for thought. As always, we're here. If you want to discuss anything further, Zoe and I would love to hear from you. Happy to sort of chat about this or anything that's piqued your interest. Please do get in touch with us through the website or LinkedIn, or you know, hey, if we're old-fashioned, you can even pick up the phone. But for now, that's it from me. What I'm going to do is just quickly hand over to Zoe, who's been listening in to some questions that have been coming through while we've been talking, just to have last few moments just to address some of those questions. So handing over to Zoe.
Okay, thanks Julie. Surprise, surprise, all of our questions this afternoon have been about apps. So obviously, if you remember, Julie was saying that there's approximately 40,000 healthcare apps on the market at the moment, and lots of your questions have been about how do you ensure standout in such a crowded marketplace. I think Julie may have covered a lot of this, but just to try and answer some of those questions, I think the first thing that you need to do is try to identify the drivers of compliance in your particular sector, and conversely, the barriers to compliance. Really understanding your audience and also the desired outcome or the behaviour you want to change is obviously key. So if you remember, Julie talked about the customer journey through from diagnosis, transition and living with. That's the first thing to identify, really, the area that you want to educate around. And maybe you might have different levels within your app that switch on at different times. So at the beginning in the diagnosis, there might be something educational about the condition, and then moving through to transition and living with, and there's lots of support mechanisms and things. I think deciding if your app is to be educational or motivational or just simply fun is the next thing to think about. Normalising the condition through the app, and also importantly, does it actually fit in with the patient lifestyles? This is particularly important when you're designing things like games for teenagers and children. It is a great idea to develop the app with patient associations. I mean, it is them who really understand their members and the issues that they might have. What's good as well about working with a patient association is that they can accredit your app and also you can jointly promote it. Involving key HCPs at the beginning is great too, because then they become advocates for the app after launch. One thing we have done in the past as well when working on apps for clients is to do a patient-facing version but also an HCP version too, so that all the audiences are involved and included. We did this recently for an eczema app we've just developed. We did a nurse version aimed at derm nurses before the launch of the patient one, which meant they had time to play on it, and also we had their own little leaderboard and things. So if they don't know how to use it, download it, install it, they're not likely to pass on that information to patients and children too. So that's been a really good idea. It made it that when we launched the patient one, it set off to a flying start and lots of people downloaded it early on. When launched, obviously, make sure it can be found. Promoting the app through your sales team, the website, PR, all the traditional channels, but of course seeding social platforms too, encouraging online reviews, sharing with online patient forums, and just making sure that all of your audience know about the app at every single opportunity. Okay, I hope that has answered a couple of the questions about apps. Thanks for your time today. We hope you've enjoyed the session and also found it useful. As Julie said, any further questions can be emailed us on this topic, and please look out on our website for details of our forthcoming webinars. Thanks very much.